clash of ancient titans, Athens versus Sparta. They were the superpowers of their age. Athens, crowned queen of the seas, wielding democracy like a revolutionary torch, and Sparta, the warrior society whose very name would become synonymous with military excellence. For 30 years, they circled each other like wolves, two radically different visions of human society locked in a dance of alliance and rivalry that would ultimately tear the Greek world apart. Their clash would give us history's first great historian in Thucydides, its first great democracy in Athens, and military legends that still echo in the halls of war colleges today. This is the story of 5 battles that changed everything. Moments when the fate of Western civilization hung by a thread, when brilliant strategies collided with fatal hubris, and when the actions of a few hundred men on blood-soaked fields would echo across millennia. From the heroic last stand at Thermopylae to the crushing defeat at Syracuse, from the triumph at Sphacteria to the final humiliation at Aegospotami, we'll see how the greatest rivalry of the ancient world played out in vivid crimson on the waters of the Aegean and the plains of Greece. What emerges is not just a tale of war, but a stark lesson about power, pride, and the price of empire that resonates as clearly today as it did 2,500 years ago. The heroic stand at Thermopylae. Dawn broke over the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae as King Leonidas of Sparta watched the dust clouds rise from the approaching Persian army. Behind him stood just 300 of his finest warriors, along with a few thousand Greek allies, a mere handful against the might of Emperor Xerxes' vast invasion force. But the Spartan king had chosen his ground well. Here at the hot gates, where sulfuric springs steamed in the morning air, the Persian advantage in numbers would mean little. The Persian advance scouts must have been bewildered by what they saw that first morning. Instead of finding the Greeks preparing defensive positions or cowering behind their shields, they discovered the Spartans calmly combing their long hair, a ritual they performed before every battle. When one Persian envoy warned that the enemy's arrows would be so numerous they would blot out the sun, the Spartan warrior Dinacus famously replied, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." For 2 days, the Persians crashed against the Greek phalanx like waves against a cliff. The narrow pass negated their superior numbers, forcing them to meet the Greeks head-on, where Spartan discipline and superior weaponry proved devastating. The Persian immortals, Xerxes' elite guard, fared no better than their regular troops. Time and again they retreated in disorder, leaving their dead scattered across the blood-soaked ground. Xerxes, watching from his golden throne above the battlefield, reportedly leaped to his feet 3 times in rage and disbelief. But betrayal would accomplish what Persian arms could not. A local Greek named Ephialtes, hoping for Persian gold, revealed to Xerxes a mountain path that would allow his army to outflank the Spartan position. When scouts reported enemy movements in the hills above them, Leonidas made his fateful decision. He dismissed the bulk of the Greek forces, keeping only his 300 Spartans, along with 700 Thespians who refused to abandon their allies, and 400 Thebans. Their mission had changed from defense to sacrifice. They would buy time with their lives for Greece to prepare its defenses. What followed became legend. The remaining Greeks advanced beyond the narrow pass into the wider part of the coastal plain, knowing it meant certain death, but determined to sell their lives dearly. They fought until their spears shattered, then with swords, and finally with bare hands and teeth. Leonidas fell early in the fighting, but his men fought on, forming a protective ring around their king's body until they were finally overwhelmed by Persian arrows and spears. The political impact of Thermopylae would prove as significant as its military outcome. The sacrifice of Leonidas and his men transformed what had been a loose alliance between Athens and Sparta into something approaching genuine cooperation, if only briefly. More importantly, it sent a powerful message throughout Greece. If Sparta's finest warriors would die to resist Persian domination, how could any other Greek city contemplate submission? Yet the battle's greatest legacy was cultural rather than strategic. The stand of the 300 became a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds that would echo through history. When the Greeks later erected a monument at Thermopylae, its inscription captured the essence of Spartan values in just 2 lines. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." It was a testament to duty, sacrifice, and the power of a few determined warriors to shape the course of history. Themes that would play out again and again as Athens and Sparta moved from allies to bitter enemies in the decades to come. The turning point, Battle of Tanagra and the First Peloponnesian War. Spring rains had turned the Boeotian plains to mud when Athens decided to make its bold move against Sparta's growing influence in central Greece. The Athenian assembly, flush with confidence from their rising naval empire, had dispatched their largest land army yet, 14,000 hoplites gleaming in bronze, their blue-plumed helmets stark against the grey sky. Their target, the rebellious city of Tanagra, where Spartan forces had gathered to challenge Athens' expanding power. Leading the Athenian force was Myronides, a commander known for his unconventional tactics. He had watched his city transform from a minor power into the master of the Aegean, its wooden walls of ships creating an empire that gathered tribute from hundreds of islands and coastal cities. But ships couldn't control the mainland, and Sparta's shadow loomed ever larger over central Greece. Something had to give. The Spartan force, though smaller, carried with it the weight of reputation. These were the sons and grandsons of Thermopylae's heroes, raised from birth for this moment. Their commander, Nicomedes, serving as regent for the young Spartan king, had positioned his troops with tactical brilliance. The Spartans would fight with the morning sun at their backs, forcing the Athenians to squint into the glare as they advanced. What followed was not the neat, orderly clash of phalanxes that Greek warfare usually prescribed. The muddy ground broke up traditional formations, turning the battle into a series of desperate, close-quarter fights. Spartan discipline proved its worth in the chaos. Their warriors maintained unit cohesion while the Athenian line began to fragment. But the Athenians had learned from years of naval warfare to adapt quickly to changing conditions. When their center began to buckle, they executed a daring flanking maneuver that almost turned the tide. The battle's turning point came from an unexpected quarter. The Thessalian cavalry, originally allied with Athens, switched sides mid-battle. Their betrayal tore through the Athenian left flank like a spear through silk. Myronides watched in horror as his carefully planned assault collapsed into desperate survival. By sunset, over 1,000 Athenians lay dead or dying, their blood mixing with the mud of Boeotia. Yet Tanagra was no simple victory for Sparta. The battle revealed dangerous truths about the changing nature of Greek warfare. Athens had shown it could field a land army capable of challenging Spartan supremacy, while Sparta discovered that maintaining control over its allies required more than just military might. The psychological impact of the battle would echo through Greek politics for decades. Athens learned it needed more reliable allies, while Sparta realized that its traditional way of warfare might not be enough in this new age of empire. Most significantly, Tanagra marked the moment when the Cold War between Athens and Sparta turned hot. The pretense of pan-Hellenic unity against Persia, already strained, shattered completely. In its place emerged a brutal realpolitik that would transform the Greek world. Athens, rather than being cowed by defeat, would respond by doubling down on its imperial ambitions. Within months, they would return to Boeotia with a vengeance, setting the stage for a decades-long struggle that would reshape the ancient world. The dead of Tanagra were buried with honor, their graves marked with elegant stelae listing their names and demes. But the true monument to their sacrifice would be written in the actions of their survivors. As news of the battle spread throughout Greece, cities and islands began taking sides, forming alliances that would define the coming conflict. The great game between democracy and oligarchy, between naval empire and land power, between Athens and Sparta, had truly begun. The turning point, the Battle of Sphacteria. No one expected the Spartans to surrender. For centuries, their mothers had sent them off to battle with a simple command: return with your shield or on it. Yet on the rocky island of Sphacteria, facing an enemy they couldn't reach and slowly starving under a relentless Athenian blockade, 292 of Sparta's proudest warriors would face a choice that would shake the Greek world to its foundations. The trap had been sprung months earlier with characteristic Athenian naval precision. General Demosthenes, proving himself a master of amphibious warfare, had seized the nearby harbor of Pylos on the Peloponnesian coast. When the Spartans predictably responded by garrisoning Sphacteria to counter this threat, the Athenians struck. Their triremes swept into the bay at dawn, smashing the Spartan fleet and cutting off all escape routes from the island. What began as a minor raid had transformed into an opportunity to break Sparta's mystique of invincibility. Back in Athens, the fiery demagogue Cleon seized the political moment. Where other politicians counseled caution, Cleon promised the assembly he would either capture the Spartans or kill them all within 20 days. It seemed like dangerous boasting until he pulled it off. Reinforcing Demosthenes with fresh troops, including light-armed javelin throwers from Thrace, Cleon helped orchestrate a new kind of warfare that would neutralize Sparta's legendary phalanx. The final assault began in darkness. Athenian archers and slingers spread across the island, peppering the Spartans with missiles from a safe distance. When the Spartans tried to advance, the light troops simply fell back, continuing their barrage. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The mighty warriors of Lacedaemon found themselves helpless against an enemy they couldn't come to grips with. Their bronze armor, so effective in traditional hoplite battles, became an exhausting burden under the hot Mediterranean sun. The psychological impact hit harder than any arrow. These were men trained from childhood to advance in disciplined ranks, to fight face-to-face with spear and shield. Instead, they were being picked off by soldiers they considered inferior, forced to watch their comrades fall to invisible arrows and javelins thrown from untouchable distances. When the Athenian hoplites finally advanced, they found not the indomitable warriors of legend, but exhausted men at the breaking point. The surrender shocked the Greek world. Sparta's ambassadors rushed to Athens offering peace terms so generous they seemed like fantasy. But Cleon, riding high on his success, convinced the assembly to demand even more. It was a fateful moment of hubris that would come back to haunt Athens. The captured Spartans were held hostage in the city, a living trophy of Athens' greatest triumph, and a constant reminder to Sparta of an humiliation that demanded vengeance. In a single stroke, Sphacteria shattered the military balance of Greece. If Spartans could surrender, anything was possible. The incident sparked a wave of rebellions against Sparta, while emboldening Athens to pursue increasingly ambitious campaigns. Yet in their moment of greatest victory, the seeds of eventual defeat were sown. Athens began to believe in its own invincibility, a delusion that would lead them to increasingly reckless ventures, culminating in the catastrophe that awaited them in distant Syracuse. The fall of Athens, the disaster at Syracuse. The greatest armada ever assembled by a Greek city slipped from Athens' harbor at Piraeus in the summer of 415 BC. 134 triremes stretched across the horizon, their oars rising and falling in perfect unison, while transport ships carried thousands of hoplites and cavalry towards Sicily. Standing at the helm of his flagship, the brilliant general Nicias felt only dread. He had argued passionately against this expedition, warning that Athens was grasping at shadows while real enemies gathered closer to home. But the assembly, enchanted by the silken words of young Alcibiades, had voted for glory. Alcibiades, beautiful, brilliant, and utterly immoral, had painted intoxicating visions of empire. Syracuse, the powerful democracy of Sicily, was ripe for conquest. Its fall would give Athens control of the western Mediterranean and unlimited resources to crush Sparta once and for all. Yet even as the fleet approached Sicily, Alcibiades' enemies struck. Accused of religious sacrilege, he fled to Sparta rather than face trial, taking with him intimate knowledge of Athenian strategy. The expedition had lost its most capable commander before the first arrow flew. The siege of Syracuse began with promise. Nicias constructed a massive wall to cut off the city from reinforcement, while the Athenian fleet bottled up the harbor. But the Syracusans, led by the cunning Hermocrates, refused to play the role of victims. They built counterwalls, sought help from Sparta, and studied Athenian naval tactics. When Spartan general Gylippus arrived with reinforcements, slipping through the Athenian blockade, the hunters became the hunted. What followed was a masterclass in how to destroy an invading army. The Syracusans modified their ships with strengthened prows, turning the enclosed harbor into a deadly arena where Athens' superior naval maneuvers meant nothing. Trapped in unfamiliar waters, the Athenian fleet was systematically destroyed. The army, stranded without naval support, attempted a desperate retreat inland. For 8 days they marched through hostile territory, harassed by cavalry, running out of food and water. When they reached the Asinaris River, discipline collapsed. Soldiers broke ranks to drink, only to be cut down by Syracusan arrows. The river ran red. The survivors faced a fate worse than death. Imprisoned in the stone quarries of Syracuse, thousands of Athenian citizens who had voted so confidently for this war died slowly from exposure, thirst, and disease. Their bodies were left unburied, a desecration that would have horrified Homer's heroes. Nicias and his fellow general Demosthenes were executed, despite their honorable conduct of the defense. When news finally reached Athens, the assembly that had cheered the fleet's departure refused at first to believe the magnitude of the disaster. The ripples from Syracuse would reshape the Greek world. Athens had lost 200 ships, 40,000 men, and its aura of invincibility. Subject cities began to revolt, smelling weakness in their imperial master. Sparta, led by the shrewd Lysander and backed by Persian gold, began building a fleet to challenge Athenian naval supremacy. Even the nature of Greek warfare had changed. Syracuse proved that even the strongest democracy could succumb to hubris, that the greatest plans could be undone by treachery, and that no power was truly invincible. Yet perhaps the most bitter lesson was written in the stone walls of the quarries, where aristocrats and commoners, generals and rowers, died together. Their dreams of easy conquest had turned to nightmare, their confidence revealed as arrogance, their strength sapped not by a superior enemy, but by their own overreaching ambition. Athens would fight on for another decade, but the seeds of its fall were sown in the waters of Syracuse's harbor. The fall of Athens, the Battle of Aegospotami, and its aftermath. The Spartan admiral Lysander watched through the pre-dawn gloom as Athens' last fleet anchored carelessly along the beach at Aegospotami. After 27 years of war, it would end not with a heroic clash of armies, but with a simple trap sprung by a patient hunter who understood his prey's fatal flaw: hubris. For 5 days, Lysander had trained his men in an elaborate deception. Each morning, his fleet would emerge from their base at Lampsacos to challenge the Athenians. Each time the Athenians formed up for battle, the Spartans would refuse combat and withdraw. And each time, the Athenian crews would beach their ships and disperse to forage for food. Despite warnings from Alcibiades, now a bitter exile living nearby, the Athenian commanders ignored the danger. They had grown lazy, confident in their superior numbers and experience. On the 6th morning, everything changed. The moment the Athenian crews scattered inland for their morning meal, Lysander's fleet struck like a thunderbolt. A bronze shield flashed in the sunlight, the prearranged signal, and 170 Spartan ships surged across the Hellespont. They found the Athenian fleet helpless, drawn up on the beach like beached whales. Only a handful of triremes managed to escape, among them the swift Paralus, racing home to deliver news that would shatter Athens' last hopes. Conon, the Athenian admiral, could only watch in horror as his men were cut down running for their ships. Rather than face justice in Athens, he fled to Cyprus with 8 ships. The rest of the fleet, nearly 170 triremes, fell into Spartan hands. Lysander ordered all 3,000 Athenian prisoners executed, a cold-blooded act that marked a new chapter in Greek warfare. The age of gentlemanly combat between citizen soldiers was over. The Paralus reached Athens at night. The sound of wailing spread from Piraeus to the city as the news passed from mouth to mouth. Xenophon wrote that no one slept that night, as citizens realized their empire was finished. Without ships to protect the grain routes from the Black Sea, Athens faced starvation. The city that had once commanded 700 tribute-paying allies now stood alone and vulnerable. Lysander took his time approaching Athens, methodically capturing or liberating each island and city of the Athenian Empire. When he finally blockaded Piraeus, he brought with him musicians playing flutes to mock the trapped Athenians as his men dismantled their long walls brick by brick. The walls that had protected Athens for 2 generations came down to the sound of Spartan victory songs. The peace terms were harsh, but could have been worse. Sparta's allies wanted Athens razed and its population enslaved, but Lysander refused. Athens would be spared, but its walls destroyed, its fleet reduced to 12 ships, and its democracy replaced with a narrow oligarchy. The city that had championed freedom throughout the Greek world would now live under the rule of the 30 tyrants, handpicked by Sparta. Yet Sparta's victory contained the seeds of its own destruction. In breaking Athens, they had also destroyed the balance of power that had defined Greek politics for a century. New powers would soon rise, first Thebes, then Macedon, while Sparta's brief hegemony would prove impossible to maintain. They had won the war but lost the peace, proving that military victory alone cannot guarantee lasting dominance. The real winner of the Peloponnesian War was neither Athens nor Sparta, but a force they had both courted and feared: Persia. By playing the Greek cities against each other and financing Sparta's final push to victory, the great king had achieved through gold what Xerxes could not accomplish with arms. The era of independent Greek city-states was drawing to a close, though none could yet see it. At Aegospotami, more than an empire fell, an entire way of life began to fade into history, reflections on the ironies of victory. History's greatest ironies often reveal themselves only in retrospect. A decade after Sparta's triumph, Theban general Epaminondas stood on the hills above Sparta itself, the first foreign commander to threaten the city in centuries. The once mighty Spartan army, depleted by endless wars and internal decay, could barely muster 1,000 citizens to defend their homeland. Their empire had lasted barely 30 years. The world created by Athens' fall proved unstable and dangerous. Sparta's attempt to rule through puppet oligarchies sparked democratic revolutions across Greece. Their harsh treatment of former allies turned friends into enemies. The Spartan warriors, trained since birth to resist luxury and corruption, found themselves unable to resist the temptations of empire. They had defeated Athens only to succumb to the very vices they despised. In Athens, democracy proved more resilient than its enemies expected. The 30 tyrants lasted only 8 months before being overthrown. The city rebuilt, though it would never again command an empire. Instead, Athens conquered the Greek world culturally, its art, philosophy, and political ideas spreading far beyond its fallen walls. Plato and Aristotle would do more to shape future generations than all the battles of the Peloponnesian War combined. But the greatest beneficiary of this self-destructive conflict emerged from the north. Philip II of Macedon studied the war's lessons carefully in his youth. He learned how Sparta's rigid traditionalism and Athens' democratic impetuosity had undermined them both. His son Alexander would build on these insights, creating an empire that would stretch from Greece to India. The age of the independent polis was over. The era of empire had begun. The stones of the Parthenon still gleam in the Attic sun, while tourists trek through the ruins of Sparta, searching for traces of Leonidas' kingdom. Little remains of the city that once made the Greek world tremble. Yet the questions that drove Athens and Sparta to war still haunt us. How do societies balance security with freedom? Can different political systems coexist peacefully? What happens when fear and ambition drive nations to destroy what they claim to protect? Perhaps that's why this ancient conflict still captivates us. In the clash between Athens and Sparta, we see reflections of our own struggles between democracy and authoritarianism, between maritime trade and continental power, between the rule of law and the law of the strong. Their tragedy reminds us that civilization's greatest achievements, art, philosophy, democracy itself, remain fragile things, easily broken by the same ambitions that helped create them. The final word belongs to Thucydides, who witnessed firsthand the destruction of the world he knew. War is a harsh teacher. Its lessons, written in blood across the centuries, still wait for those wise enough to learn them.